Okay, so in 2015, I got my Hawaii hairdresser's license and I headed over to the islands to see if I could get a job. And I had a plan. I had a tent. Maybe not a good plan, but it was a plan nonetheless. I had a tent. I had already been over there a few times scouting it out and seeing how everything worked. And I had my little midlife crisis boyfriend, number two, with me, and away we went. And so after being on Oahu for a couple of weeks, we went over to the Big Island where we had acquaintances there. And we ended up staying at a house that they were squatting in, but we didn't know that at the time, and all kinds of stuff. So I spent 6 months in Hawaii in 2015. And, 4.5 months maybe in Hawaii in 2015. And I ended up in Pahoa, and I ended up getting a job, and I ended up working, and that was a lot of fun. And then, my partner didn't work, so he was stuck in a tent or stuck on the property. We met a shaman, and we stayed with a shaman. We did shamanic journeying. We did all kinds of stuff, and so we had this whole adventure, and my favorite part of the adventure was the rainbow eucalyptus trees were just beautiful. But we met a lot of people, we did a lot of things, and I didn't really think about living in a tent as being bad, but I guess it was really stressful for my partner. But I had a blast. And then I went from there to Tennessee and stayed with a friend in Tennessee for 6 months, where a lot changed and a lot happened. And then my partner and I went on our ways and separated. And it was interesting to be homeless in Hawaii. It was like a lot of really good people that were really good-natured. We learned where the churches would hold dinners, and they would have sermons and stuff, and I met this 94-year-old lady who was so full of life that was just an inspiration. And we met people from around the world, and a lot of youth on the streets, and talked to them, a lot of queer youth on the streets and trans youth, and did a lot of talking and encouraging them to not spend their lives on the street. And I had a great time. But when I got a job, I actually won awards at the job I was working at for Supercuts, where I had sales, combo sales, where I would do hair and sell a product. And so I did really good that way. And so I had a blast. But being a homeless hairdresser was really interesting because people treat you differently when you're unhoused. And then when we got a place to stay, people were like, oh, good for you. And then they blow you off. Like, they're like, okay, well, that's normal. You're supposed to be living that way, so we're not going to say anything. But when you're living in a tent, they're like, oh my God, you're riffraff. You're scum of the earth. You're all this stuff. And I'm like, well, no, we're not. And we met a lot of really good people from around the world that were unhoused, living in tents. So I think some of the highlights of the trip were snorkeling, and the fish coming up and eating out of my hands. I was swimming in a canal, and a big sea turtle came and swam right underneath me, scared the shit out of me. But it was awesome. And just events like that. Now where we were over in the islands all those years ago is pushed out 1.5 miles because of the volcano erupting. A lot of it has changed in the town. The houses and stuff where we were swimming are all gone. And so it was interesting, but my dad told me, he said, oh, you're having a midlife crisis. And I said, well, better to have a midlife crisis and get it over with than to never have had a midlife crisis and worry about what I could have done or would have done. So I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I worked. I met really great people. And I had some controversies. There was one person I worked with that was transgender that didn't appreciate me calling her out when she would be nasty to people, and I'd be like, why do you gotta be nasty like that? Like, you can just be who you are and let people accept you. And she's like, you don't understand. And so one day we were working and she pushed me up against the wall, and I was like, okay, if you're gonna play like this, expect that I can fight back. But I didn't. I just turned it into my manager and let them handle it. And then we had a big breakdown in the salon one day, and they had a giant argument, and people got written up and all this stuff, and I was trying to make it less, and it was interesting. It was one of the more volatile situations I've ever had working in a salon, but people are so passionate. But there was one story that stood out, and this lady was from Texas, and she could not handle Hawaii. She was like, everything's so backwards, and the way they do things down here is so weird, and blah, blah, blah. And I looked at her, and I was doing her hair, and I said, have you ever thought that you might be the weird one? And she was just shocked, and I just smiled, because that was kind of the theme of my whole trip was, you know, people are unique, and people are diverse, and people are a lot of things, and you might be the weird one if you're not getting along with them. But yeah, I was a homeless hairdresser in Hawaii. It was a challenge and a lot of fun.